Welcome to Stories of Brisco and Bradshaw. I would be Bradshaw, and that would be your Chickasaw native, your Chickasaw Hall of Famer, Oklahoma's favorite son, Mr. Gerald Brisco. And we have got wrestling's favorite historian back. We've got an incredible story about one of the greatest icons, one of the greatest families in the history of professional wrestling, the Welch dynasty, headed by Mr. Roy Welch. And joined, as always, is our good friend, Mr. Tony Richards. Tony, welcome to part 3 of
Hello. Hey, everybody. Hey, guys. How was your Thanksgiving?
Oh, it's wonderful. It was wonderful. John was down there in that Texas country, I think. And,
yes, I was.
And I
always send Mr.
visit family
Brisco a
in
note on
Orlando.
Thanksgiving and telling him that how happy we are that we discovered him.
Well,
that's a holiday like Columbus Day. Why do we have this? I mean, I'm all for giving thanks to family and all that stuff, and that's how we celebrate it, as a family holiday, not as a holiday where we're celebrating damn foreigners coming and trying to commit genocide over all my people here. But
right,
that's a story for another time. But
there's still a little heat there.
Oh,
after what 400 years or whatever.
Yeah. You can have Manhattan back if you want it. You can have it.
Oh man, I tried to talk Vince into mine, but I told him he finally got it back. I finally got it back when we made that sale, and he got pissed off. And he talked about that for the entirety I was with the company up there, 35 years. Brisco always said they finally got back Manhattan when I bought the stock from him. We tried, man.
Got retribution on the deal.
Yeah, you got that right. I never will forget it. We were sitting there having coffee at the lawyer's office. And he said, "Man, I'm paying you. Bitching about what he's having to pay." And I said, just look at it like this. We're finally getting Manhattan back. Well, you can have the damn.
Tony, the biggest pop I've ever gotten out of it when I was inducted the Brisco brothers in the Hall of Fame. And I went through the whole thing about how they sold Manhattan for some shiny beads and a bag of Smiths. And the red man finally got the white man back when they sold Georgia Championship Wrestling to Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And I could hear Vince laughing from the stage, like, ah!
That's awesome.
Oh, it was great.
Oh,
that's awesome. Well, we're going to talk about family and a guy who made a lot of transactions in his lifetime.
A lot of them, Tony. Man, what fantastic notes you've been sending us here to study on, man. And what a dynasty. What a friggin' dynasty the Welton family was. People just don't realize it, man. And we here on this show, thanks to you, we've detailed it down from the early days, pre-television days, from the 20s all the way up, where we're up now to the 50s and 60s, right? 70s.
Right, yeah. Today we're going to talk about Roy being an entrepreneur, and he's going to wrestle less, although he's going to be in several really important and big matches on today's show. He's sort of starting to settle into the background a little bit. He's focused more on growing the empire. He's branching out into other things. We're going to talk about his dairy farm today. We're going to talk about Herb. We're going to talk about the whole family. We're going to talk about Christine Jarrett and her coming to work for the company. We covered that last time, but she gets even further entrenched in the company on this episode. We're going to talk about the television coming in the mid 1950s. I hope we can get to the part where Sputnik Monroe pops Memphis. I mean, we got a lot of great things to talk about today.
Oh, man, like I said, Sputnik Monroe is one of my all-time heroes. I rode up and down the highway with him a couple of times. Just a quick story before we get rolling, but Sputnik Monroe, like I said, was always a hero, always a character, always a hero. I was just starting in the business. I'd save my money. Finally was able to buy a car. The car was probably 10, 15 years old, but I fresh out of college. It was a new car to me, and I shined it all up. To my first road trip, I had to take Buddy Monroe and Trent Phillips, two Tennessee legends. I got in my car, and let's listen to the story. So we're going along. We get close to Tulsa, and we start arguing some fact about probably Oklahoma, Tennessee, or something like that. And all of a sudden, Sputnik turns and he chewed. He went to take a spit. He forgot to roll the damn window down. Spit all over my damn my side window. I started a brand new car for me. I just shined and shined and all that stuff. And he added some more spit to it. So he starts, and he's shrieking it all over. And I start cussing Sputnik out. All right, kid, what do you want to do about it? I said, nothing. He said, well, how far you want to go? I said, I just want to take you up there to his hotel to get you off. And he said, no, I don't mean that. Do you want to fight or you want to pull us car over? I said, Sputnik, come on. I mean, just don't rip my damn car anymore. And we shook hands and made up there. But that's close as I ever got to get fishing cup with Sputnik.
Well, guys,
Well,
it's just transportation. He kept saying, it's just transportation. And for 6 months after that, while he's in Oklahoma, I say, hey, how's your transportation running? And I said, great, but you're not getting in it.
One thing about Sputnik is that back in the 50s and in the 60s, bookers would bring him in when they wanted to get back to more of the bumping heel type style. When they thought they were getting away from it, they'd bring Sputnik in and they'd tell him, like, Sputnik, I want you to show these guys how to bump, as a heel. And he'd go in there and he'd wrestle for a while, and then all of a sudden all the heels were bumping, and so he was quite.
He'd bump and get over, right, Tony?
yeah, that's right. That's right.
How was Sputnik as a worker, Jerry?
Sputnik was a good worker. He was a brawler type. He wasn't a no technical type, to say the least, but he was just a real brawler. But he wasn't a big guy either. He shorter than I am, and I'm 5'11", and
he was
5'8".
He was 5'9".
5'9", so he was short, but he's stocky as hell and just stronger than a damn bull. But he was a broader type worker, but. Him and Hodge, he could completely change gears. Him and Hodge would have some of the best matches you ever seen because Sputnik had that healed up where he could mix in the brawling part with Hodge and still stay competitive with it. He wasn't a great worker, but he was a money guy. He could draw you some money.
Yeah, he was 5'9", but his mouth was super huge.
Yeah, it was. So,
I got to ride with him in Texas for about 2 weeks.
Sputnik, wow. Did he spin on the windshield?
No, never know. I didn't know. No, I didn't know to watch him. No, for some reason, I think his son was breaking in the business or something. I can't remember what it was, and he was down there working for Crockett or something. I can't remember. And anyway, he needed a ride, so I said, "Well, ride with me." So he rode like a week or two with me to all the towns and hotels and all the stuff, and it was awesome. He was just pleasant as he could be, just nice and fun, and as you would expect, told a million stories. Really nice guy.
Sputnik was one of those locker room guys that you love being in the same locker room with because he just kept everybody entertained.
Oh, he was pleasant as he could be.
Off the wall type guy.
Yeah, pleasant as he could be. Just fun, would tell stories, would laugh and joke. It was very enjoyable.
Yeah. So let's plan down the road. We'll probably brush through Sputnik today, but we got to get a special on Sputnik Monroe.
I'd love to. He's one of my favorite people in the wrestling business. As we've said many times, he's the one that integrated a lot of the Southern wrestling, which is pretty cool.
Had Terry Funk's first match.
Well, I did not know that till you Cena brought him in because he knew he'd take care of Terry. See, once again, John, he being brought in because Cena knows the guy can work. He can work both styles, the rugged style and also the scientific style. And he'd put Terry in good positions and teach him or be a well-rounded worker.
And I don't know if I told that story when we did the Dory Funk episode or not, but do you guys know that story about that match with Terry?
No, you didn't. I don't think you told that story. So let's briefly touch into it, then we'll get back to the Welches.
Yeah. So they bring Sputnik in. They have the match at Sports Arena in Amarillo, and Sputnik gets Terry down on the mat, and he keeps him down there, and he says, "You're doing good, kid. Just lay there. You're doing good. Just stay down there. Just stay down there." And after about 5 or 10 minutes, Senior comes running out of the locker room down to ringside and says, "Terry, get your ass up off the mat right now and start kicking his ass." Sputnik's like, "Oh no, boy, stay down there. You're doing good right there where you are. Don't get up now. Just stay down there." And so finally Terry goes, "I had to listen to my dad because I knew I was going to get another ass whipping if I didn't get up and start whooping Sputnik's ass." So he gets up and makes a comeback and beats Sputnik in the match, but Sputnik had him down on the mat, and Terry was just doing what he said. He was just laying there.
Coming in, I'm going to jump in, coming in as a college wrestler and everything, the selling part of it was you did the timing of the selling is so important in a match like that. And as a baby face, how long do I stay down? I asked Sputnik Monroe one time. I passed this same advice to Shawn Michaels one time. I asked Sputnik, how do you know when you stay down long enough? He said, kid, if you think you stay down too long, count to 10 and then get up.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah, and I passed that on to Shawn Michaels. So Shawn would get quick celery, come down, boom, boom, boom. I said, Shawn, just stay. Well, how long? I said, count. When you think you're down there, count to 10. But advice Shawn Button Monroe gave me years and years ago.
You bet. That's good stuff. Yeah, the more I've studied Roy, it's sort of like when you really focus in on one person like that, like I have the last 6 months or so to get ready for this series of shows, you learn more about them and you notice more about their tendencies. And it's obvious to me that the way he dealt with the town promoters, the way he kept guys around, the way he got all of his family members involved, the way they all gravitated toward him as the patriarch of the family. I'm pretty convinced that the reason he expanded the empire so much is he had to have a place for all these people to work. And I think he wanted them to be involved. And he always had kind of the same pattern. He would bring them into Dyersburg and he would mentor them and work with them in Dyersburg, in the Dyersburg office, and they'd run some of the small towns there that he originally put together in the late 30s to be the original Tennessee territory. He'd put them in Sykeston, Caruthersville, he'd put them in Cape Girardeau and Paducah, and they'd work around there and they'd book that and all, and then he'd send them out. Like he did that with Buddy, he did that with other people, and then he'd send them down to other new places. Roy didn't go. He sent them out there. And so that just makes me think that he just was a family guy who wanted all of his family to be involved in what he was doing. And, he just kept buying up stuff and expanding to give more and more people opportunities.
Wow.
And looking at what he's done, especially we're going to get into the dairy farm on this episode, which is really remarkable. It tells you what kind of businessman Roy was, if you didn't glean that just from what he did in professional wrestling alone. But I mean, Roy was such a unique individual. He's one of the greatest promoters in wrestling history, I think you have to say, right?
And one of the most forgotten. Because
right, that's right. You talk so much more about about guys that you know better. Crockett, Graham, Gagne. Guys that came along a little bit later had more TV. But Roy Welch was. I mean, he's up there with Vince McMahon. I would say, right?
Yeah. Well, even Nick gets more credit than Roy because he was the front man. And he was the out front guy. And a lot of people talk about Nick, but a lot of times Roy isn't even mentioned in the conversation. So. That's unfortunate, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this show. Is he needs to be recognized.
And one thing else I love about Roy is Roy was an old tough guy. A lot of these guys promoters. A lot of times it's one or the other. Some guys were both, but a lot of guys came along. They're more heavy in the promotion than they were wrestling. He was a great wrestler too, and a legit badass. That then migrated into being the promoter as well.
Yeah, well, he grew up. I mean, just think about his background. His father was a wrestler in the days where, guys grew stubble on their face to get guys down in a headlock, and then they'd grind their whiskers into their, sides of their faces and draw blood with it and cut off their nose.
That to me.
They do all those. They do all those things back then, and his dad probably broke him in a little bit like that, and he saw his dad do that the way that wrestling used to be in the 1900s and the 1910s and 1920s. Then he gets broken in by the roughest cob of all time, the original Dutch Mantel, who breaks his wrist and breaks his ribs and sees if he's worthy of even being in the wrestling business. And Roy just keeps coming back. And so Dutch says, okay, I think this guy could be in our business. So
people should take a look at pictures of that Dutch Mantel, the original Dutch Mantel. He was a mean-looking dude, man.
Yeah, he really was. And he and Cal Farley, they are the guys who originally developed the whole we're promoters and we want to give back to the community thing. Cal Farley started the Boys Ranch. Cal Farley and Dutch Mantel did all kinds of charity work. They were entrepreneurs. And Roy saw all that when he was in West Texas. So when he moved out to finally get down to Dyersburg, Tennessee, he was very involved in Dyersburg. He eventually moved down to a little bitty town of about 200 people just outside Dyersburg, and even smaller than Dyersburg, called Yorkville. And Yorkville had about 200 people in it. But when Roy was there and he started growing his dairy farm, all of a sudden other businesses started gravitating to Yorkville. And in the middle 60s, I mean, they grew to having 10 or 15 businesses in Yorkville. And there was never a business article published in the paper talking about business in Yorkville that did not mention Roy Welch.
Wow.
There was the Bank of Yorkville. They were putting in a water system for an infrastructure, and I'm sure that probably had to do with the fact that Roy had one of the largest irrigation systems in the South for his dairy farm. So he was using lots of water out there. And there were lots of articles in the paper where people would come out and just stand in his fields and watch his irrigation system like it was a, you know, it was a modern wonder of the 20th century. To see how he watered these pastures and kept them green and watered these crops and got all this water out to, I mean, I don't know if you guys know much about dairy farming, but those cows have to eat and they have to drink, and you have to milk them every single day. I grew up being so thankful that my dad was not a dairy farmer, because we were cattle ranchers and horse farmers, and we took days off and we took vacations. And all the kids I knew that lived down on the dairy farm, they never got a vacation. They never got to go anywhere because
I worked on a dairy farm growing up for my brother-in-law.
Oh man,
I didn't. They didn't trust me with the farm with the dairy farm. I just fed the cattle and tended to the cattle. I didn't do anything with the dairy farm. Thank goodness.
But you were there long enough to see what they were doing every day, though.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, but you had several different parts of it. So I did more with the grazing part of it, the feeding part of it, stuff like that, than I did with the actual dairy farm itself. You know, I was only 14 years old, so you know, they didn't want me around the machinery.
I don't blame them. People are going to get mad at me when I tell you, but I got one of the greatest. I'll tell you guys offline. One of the greatest Terry Funk stories about a calf called Moo that you've ever heard in your life. And
awesome.
I cannot tell it online. I'm sorry, folks, but it's the greatest story you've ever heard. Terry got caught doing something that you shouldn't be doing with a calf.
I think that's worse than telling it.
That sounds like
it's not what you think, Joe.
That sounds like a country song, Terry Funk and the Cow.
Well, it's a Texas story. It's what Texans do out on the range when they get lonely.
He buys this dairy farm like in the mid 50s, and he's got like 10 cows. He's got to take care of and milk every day. 1963, he's up to like 400. 1967, he's got several hundred. By 1970, he's got 1,000 dairy cows.
Wow.
On this farm. And he is one of the largest milk and dairy producers for Seal Test Dairy, which is one of the largest companies in the South for dairy products. I found just a ton of help wanted ads. They were always looking for people to work on the farm. They were looking for, like John said, they were looking for tractor drivers. They were looking for feeders. They were looking for people to do, you know, various chores around. And in some of the ads, it was contact this phone number, Roy Welch. In other ads, it was contact this number for Bob Welch. And Bob Welch is Roy's wife, Bobby. But as we've said, in those days, you know, women didn't take those kinds of positions of authority. A lot of women didn't even work outside the home, but his wife actually was the person who ran the dairy farm. And I think by 1970, she had like 30, 35 employees working in the office and in the administrative side and out on the farm. And it was a very large and impressive. I saw a lot of places where he was recognized as one of the premier dairy farmers in the South.
Now, his irrigation, did he design that himself?
Not sure. Irrigation was not, you know, that just kind of came along in that 1950s era because of all the things that farmers had been through in the Dust Bowl and all of that stuff. So I don't know if that was something he saw or heard about or if he designed, but It was. I wish I had more pictures of it. I only have just a couple of newspaper articles where they're showing people walking around on the farm. But from everybody I've gathered
Was
from,
this before the TVA project?
no, the TV. Now he started the wrestling company before the TVA project.
Well, it was dairy
But
farm.
his dairy farm was after. Yeah.
After.
Well, part of it. I mean, the TVA went on all through the '60s and into the '70s. So,
And for those that don't know, play the Tennessee Valley Authority Act.
yeah, that's right. Tennessee Valley Authority. They built the dam right over here next to me that created Kentucky Lake. They also, in the 1968, they created another lake here called Barkley Lake, which is the twin lake to Kentucky Lake for electro power generation, and provided a lot of electricity to.
But no matter what, that's pretty groundbreaking that he's using the irrigation like this, because most people were not.
That's right.
You know,
And people were coming to him to see how it worked and what he had going, and obviously doing it on a smaller scale than he was doing, but he was everything he did was top notch.
Do you know what
How many acres was that? Do you recall?
I think it was. Shoot, I didn't put it in my notes, but
called for that many head of cattle, he had to have quite a bit of acres.
Oh yeah. He was way up over the 1,000. Two,
Wow.
3, several thousand. And all the Welch people, all the brothers, they would get into farming, and they had farms, and his son Buddy Fuller would have farms. And
how many hours did he have in a day? Because he's running this huge wrestling without the advent of a private plane or great interstate road system.
Yeah.
And he's got this big dairy farm system. He's got groundbreaking irrigation. I mean, this is pretty remarkable what he's doing.
Yeah, and they did get a plane, but when he's starting out and he's building all this stuff, you're right, he didn't, and the road system wasn't that great, and some places didn't even have electricity, and so everything that he built and was involved in was in a different time and a different era that we barely can even appreciate today. He was known. I was going to say too. I mean, Buddy, his son, even in his later years after he really got out of the wrestling business, he was still land developing and going out and buying pieces of property and developing them and removing trees and putting lakes in and then selling them for 10 times what he bought them for. I mean,
he and Eddie Graham down here in Florida, they were probably one of the largest landowners at one time here in Hillsborough County as anybody. They had land in every little section of Tampa down there in our county, Hillsborough County here. But it was amazing, the entrepreneurship of them. But let's go back to Roy. Roy, back at 54, he broke his hip, and that's when he kind of started getting out of the ring. And
I originally was told that he broke his hip in 1954, but the more I kind of look into it, I think it was closer to 59 when it happened, because there's a whole stretch of about 9 months where he doesn't wrestle, and so and then he retires in 60, so from the ring. So I think it was probably closer to the end of the 50s when he broke his hip, because he was well known by the people that he was close to, and when wrestling fans wasn't around, he walked with a cane or a walking stick. But he didn't want wrestling fans to see that. But when he was just around business people and other farmers and all that, he definitely walked with a cane and with a little limp. The other thing is, somewhere around there, he had the second accident where not his fault, but a guy he was wrestling died. And that also contributed to him getting out of the ring. So the combination of the broken hip and the guy passing away, the second guy passing away with him in a match, probably was the reason why he didn't wrestle as much. But by 1959, he's 58 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, and he, we're going to go through one of the classic feuds of the television era when television comes in, and he's in the middle of it when he's like 56 years old. So, and that was considered kind of elderly back in those days. I mean, but I think by all those combinations of things kind of caused him to hang up the wrestling tights. And that's when in 1960, around that time, is when he starts getting mentioned more prominently, because it was Nick Gulas is doing this, and Nick Gulas is doing that, and Nick Gulas is doing this, because Roy didn't want people to know he was the promoter. And so most of the public information was really centered around Nick, rather than Roy.
That's the reason they had these front men. I mean, all the family did that later on. But something I want to get to, that which created one of the first is Roy's penchant for new cars. Every year he would go buy a new Cadillac, right?
New white Cadillac.
White Cadillacs. And what did this lead to?
and Nick also did that. Nick also had a new Cadillac every year, and I think Nick's was pink. But Roy's was white.
Is that where Elvis probably got his idea to pick?
Maybe that could be. But that ran through all the generations. I mean, you always knew a Fuller was booking a territory if they were having a Cadillac tournament. And that all going back to Roy having a new Cadillac every single year, and that was his car of choice. And he was, very proud of his car, and of course he'd put enough miles on it, for it to be worn out after a year, because he preferred driving to flying, of course.
And they would drive from Tennessee to Florida back and forth several times.
Alabama, Mississippi, from one end of Tennessee to the other, Kentucky, Missouri. And that's the other thing, too, is that's what led me to kind of think that he was expanding the territory more for family and had given family opportunities, because he didn't work outside the Tennessee territory very often. Like if you look at his schedule in the 50s, here's the towns he worked. He worked Nashville, Knoxville, Sikeston, Missouri, Jackson, Tennessee, Paducah, Kentucky, Bowling Green, Kentucky, Kingsport, Tennessee, Paducah, Clarksville, Tennessee, Bowling Green, Jackson, Bowling Green, Nashville, Knoxville. So he just stayed in that original Tennessee territory that he created, rather than, he didn't work Chattanooga, he didn't work, South Alabama, he didn't work Mississippi. Whereas earlier in his career, he was headlining. He was headlining Birmingham, he was headlining New Orleans, he was headlining Chicago and Indianapolis. And by this time, he's just sticking around pretty much within driving distance of the Dyersburg office.
What would you say mileage, just off the top of your head, these guys are doing? Because, like you say, these are country roads. These aren't interstate highways that we're blessed with now, or blessed with in the 70s. What kind of mileage?
I can't remember. Did I email you guys the pages from the book and book?
No, you didn't.
I can't remember. Maybe I didn't. But a guy that was watching our show, and I'd had a little bit of contact with him before, or whatever, Justin Adams. His grandfather was a wrestler named Jesse James. And Jesse James' real-life brother was his tag team partner, and even his wife was a wrestler. And Justin, not too long ago, found all his booking books. And he sent me copies of the pages of his booking books for all the 40s, the 50s, and 60s. Ooh. And it's amazing to look at all the miles that this guy was covering and all these towns that he was hitting. And that was what it was like working in the Tennessee territory. I mean, I don't even have any idea how many miles it was, but I can tell you this. By the time they get to the 70s, there's a good story about two wrestlers that meet up in a town one night in the locker room. And the one guy says, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know you was in the territory." He goes, "Well, I got here last year." And the guy goes, "You did?" He goes, "Yeah, I've been working this end over here." And the other guy had been working the other end, and they were in the same territory, didn't even meet up for 6 months.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's how big it was. And later on, as we get into episode 4 and maybe 5, when they buy Memphis, it actually creates 2 territories in one. And so we'll take a look at that when we get there. So let's talk about Christine Jarrett. So the Jarretts, of course, is a name that's associated with the Welches, and we talked on our last episode about Christine working in the shoe store, meeting Nick, coming to work for him as a ticket seller. Well, by the 1950s, she's working the ticket office full time, and she's bringing her family to the matches every Tuesday night at the Hippodrome. They sat on the west side in seats 9 through 12, row number 2. Her father was helping sell tickets, and her son Jerry was also selling tickets. And Nick had also hired another office person, Nina Bond, to work alongside Christine in the office. And what's interesting is Christine's mother was part of the family that would come to the matches. And in the old kayfabe era of wrestling, in every market or every arena, there's that fan.
Right.
There's the elderly lady who is slinging her purse and hollering. She's a nice, wonderful grandmother during the week. But that night at the matches, she is the most wild, crazy, knock his head off kind of person there is.
And profanity.
Yep, yeah. Oh my God, that was Christine Jarrett's mother. I mean, she said that son of a bitch, kill him, and all that kind of stuff, boy. And she would holler and boo louder than anybody in the arena. When the baby faces came out, she'd like cheer with enthusiasm, and then when the heels come out, she'd be screaming, "Rip his head off!" And Christine reminisced about one of her favorite memories in the wrestling business was when Lou Thez came in and wrestled Gorgeous George. And I think I've tracked that down. That would have been February 3rd, 1953. And the image that Lou Thez presented himself with as the NWA World Champion was something that would stay with Jerry the rest of his life. All the way up.
Stayed with all of us that had the pleasure of seeing Lou come into our arena. He would come in not through the back way, but through the box office.
Right. Yeah, and that's where Jerry first saw him. He was in front in the box office selling tickets when Lou Thez came in, and he was carrying his bag, and his bag was really nice, and he was in a suit and a tie, and he was carrying himself with all this authority and all this honor. And that was Jerry, just like, I have not seen a wrestler like this before, but that's really cool. And he wrestled Gorgeous George that night in the Hippodrome. And Christine had been able to get permission to take her daughter Carolyn back to meet Gorgeous George. And Carolyn got to get one of George's Georgie pins that night. And so that was a kind of a cool memory. Also, Nick was pretty much a potty mouth. I mean, every other word was a I don't think he matched Roy Shire, but it would have been close contest. But Christine could put Nick in his place faster than anybody, just as an employee. She would just say, "Nick Goulas, you shut your mouth." And Nick, there's ladies in the room. Or Nick, when her daughter was going to come, she goes, "A little lady's about to come into the room. You need to either shut up or clean up your language." And she could put Nick in that kind of place when nobody else could. And I think he always respected her for that she didn't tolerate that from him. Another thing was that Christine was so intrigued that no wrestler had ever gone to the ring before with music. And then all of a sudden, the pomp and circumstance music that you hear at graduations and things like that, that was George's entrance music. She goes, "What in the world is that out there in the arena?" And Nick goes, "Oh, that's Gorgeous George's. He likes to go to the ring with music. Like, I don't understand it, but he likes to have music playing," which I think, as we see the way wrestling has evolved and everything, was pretty evolutionary, for the time, for sure.
Then eventually that evolved into Ric Flair's entrance.
Yeah. Well, 2001 is from the movie 2001, it was Rick. Christine, the way she fit in that office, though, she was the perfect, a lot of people know I'm a management consultant and an executive coach, and we always talk about the three-legged stool. The perfect team probably has three people in it, and each one of them knows what their function is with a lot of clarity and a lot of skill, and they stay with their function. And the three of them, Roy, Nick, and Christine, had a great management stool. Roy was the visionary. He was the person that was always looking to expand and to go out and conquer new territory. Nick was the promoter. He was the marketer. He was the advertiser. He was the ticket seller and the hype man. And Christine, she was the processes and systems person that kept all the trains running on time and kept things, kept the schedules of the wrestlers and where they're supposed to be and what the shows were and all of that. She was the administrative whiz for that really made that office work. And she became pretty invaluable to the point where in 1954, every wrestling promotion, for the most part, the office typically owned a Saturday night town that was not too far away from the office. In Georgia, it was Griffin or Carrollton. In Texas, in Amarillo, it was Hereford. That was the Saturday night town that the office owned, and it was not too far a trip for the boys to make. They'd be home by, 10:30 or 11 after the matches. Well, for Tennessee, it was Columbia, not too far from Nashville, about 45 miles west of Nashville. And in 1954, they had just bought Chattanooga. In 1950, they just bought Alabama. Nick was busy with Chattanooga and Birmingham, so he offered the spot or the Saturday night show to Christine to be the town promoter. And she had written enough commission checks to the town promoters to know that, man, this is going to be a great financial opportunity for me. If I can get this town going, I'm going to be able to make a whole lot more money. I can make more money, in 2 months than I would have normally made in 6 months if I can, figure this out. And she would figure it out. Matter of fact, one of the things that happened was she didn't drive and she didn't have a driver's license. So she always needed a driver. And there was a young wrestler who was just starting out in the business who was booked on the town, or at least this would also happen in the old days. I think you could confirm this, Jerry, that sometimes guys would just go to the town hoping to get work.
A lot of times, yeah.
You just show up there with your bag ready to go in case somebody didn't show up or something changed, and so that was Eddie Marlin. And Eddie Marlin would drive to Columbia every Saturday night. Sometimes he'd work, sometimes he wouldn't, but he'd always have his bag ready to work if he was needed. And Christine told Eddie, hey, I'd like for you to, take me, be my regular driver to Columbia. So it was on those car rides that Christine Jarrett and Eddie Marlin got to be pretty close friends. And she told him flat out, because she was very good friends with Eddie. She got to know his wife, Norma. And she said, now, Eddie, listen, I've been at the Hippodrome in Nashville long enough to know that when these boys get popular and they get to wrestling, they get familiar with these ladies around there. And I just want you to know, if you ever do that, I'm going to go straight to Norma and tell her about it. Because I'm good friends with Norma, and I love Norma, and I love you. And I'm just telling you this because I like you, Eddie. You don't need to be messing with that. You don't need to fall into that trap. And if you ever do, I'm going to go straight to Norma and tell her. And they were locked in and close friends from then on. And, of course, we know later on that Eddie would be very much more entrenched in Christine's life and very much involved in the Jarrett promotion for sure.
Now, young Jerry Jarrett is what, about 12, 13 years old at this time, Harry?
Yeah. He got a lesson pretty early on from Christine. He came to her once and asked her for $1. And she told him if he'd sit down with her and pay all the bills and go to the grocery store and then balance the bank book, if $1 was left over, he could have the $1, but whatever was in the bank book, he could have it. And so they sat down and they did it and did all that, and she ended up having 37 cents left over. And so Jerry got the 37 cents, and I don't think he ever forgot that lesson his whole life about finances. He started selling programs when he was 8 at the Hippodrome. He got a penny as a commission for every program he sold. And then at 12, he got promoted to ticket taker at the front door. 14, he got what was called back then a hardship driver's license. So he was able to drive. And then he started promoting spot shows. And during the summer when school was out.
At 14.
At 14. And
wow.
It's hard to explain to people, but it was a different time back then. Like I remember doing all kinds of things at 12 and 14 on the farm and at the feed store that my grandfather, he would just walk away and leave me in charge, at like 12 and 14 years old, something you wouldn't think about doing today. But yeah, at 15, he was probably promoting every small town in Middle Tennessee and Central and Southern Kentucky because he was making money. And he'd make a trip to the town. He'd put out window cards. Then he'd make a second trip to the town. He'd put a newspaper ad in. Third trip to town was to run the show. And he would load up his car with all kinds of popcorn bags and soda for the concession stand and just everything you can imagine that you would go and see at a wrestling show. He was running it. He'd recruit people to run the concession stand. He'd usually get his grandfather to take the tickets. And he just became a little promoter, at a young age. And he also learned how to take the sports writers out to lunch. He'd go to town and find out who was writing the sports section.
Who was he learning that off of? Guys like Nick Goodless, because Nick had to be a pretty social guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's around the Hippodrome from his time he can know anything, So
he's watching Nick and his uncle,
well, he's watching Roy. Yeah, watching Roy.
Not his uncle. Let me get that straight. Not his uncle.
Well, we probably
not his dad.
Yeah, we'll probably get to it in the next episode, but. Jerry's father, we covered that in the last episode. Jerry's father, they got divorced when he was just a baby. So he never really had a father figure. But I think Roy kind of started becoming the father figure to him. And I think he and Eddie Marlin were the two guys that ended up being father figures to Jerry. And I think Jerry was watching Roy. I think in our next episode, we're going to talk about Roy takes a lot of interest in Jerry. But he's learning all this stuff by osmosis. He's watching them every Tuesday night, set up the concession stand, putting out the chairs, getting somebody to be the timekeeper, getting somebody to be the bell ringer, getting somebody to be the ring announcer. So he just naturally knows you just do that wherever you're running a wrestling show, right? And so from the time he's from about 15 till he's 18, he's probably one of their top spot show promoters in the whole company.
Now, was he doing anything in school at the time as well? Was he playing any sports? Was he trying to wrestle? He was just being a whatever he could do for the wrestling promotions.
Right. Yeah. No, he was a spot show promoter first. He didn't even think about becoming a wrestler for quite some time. In the summer of 1958, they have a car accident. Once Christine was able to save up a little bit of money, she bought bus tickets for them and was able to afford hotel rooms. She started taking the family on family vacations to Florida. And so they'd go to St. Petersburg every year. And she finally had saved up enough money to drive a 1956 Chevrolet. And they've been taking these bus trips. So now they're going to drive for the first time. Jerry's got a hardship driver's license, so he's driving the car. Well, a motorcycle guy buzzes past him, pisses Jerry off. And so he's like steps on the gas and starts trying to catch the motorcycle guy, ends up losing control, ends up flipping the car. Christine and Carolyn, his sister, in the back seat. He and another passenger in the front seat. They get thrown from the car. Nobody's seriously hurt, but everybody's just kind of banged up, and the car is totaled. But one of the things that happened on that trip was Carolyn said that Jerry and Christine, her mother, just talked wrestling the whole time. And she's like, even after we had the car accident, it was almost like the car accident never happened. Like we went on to the hotel room and they just kept talking about wrestling. So that sort of like soured her on the wrestling business because I think she just didn't feel like she had as much in common with her brother or her mother because that's all they talked about was the wrestling business. 1960, they moved to a new house on Princeton Avenue. Christine saved up the money to buy a new house, a ranch style brick home for $12,000 just off West End Avenue, which West End Avenue is
Nashville.
Yeah, West End Avenue in Nashville is one of the more prominent neighborhoods there. A lot of big old Southern style, I wouldn't call them mansions, but just big houses are on West End. And so they live 3 blocks off of West End. So they moved to a lot nicer neighborhood. The neighborhood in Nashville they had lived in that up until that point was becoming real commercialized and was going more urbanized. And so they moved out to a little bit nicer part of town, newer, more developed, newer development type part of town. And Christine, by the way, was the first member of her family to ever graduate high school. And she was very, very encouraging for her kids to go to college. They both, Jerry and Carolyn, both enrolled in Peabody College in Nashville with the intention of becoming teachers. But they both eventually dropped out, and they both eventually ended up getting married. Jerry married his girlfriend that he had known in high school, and his sister Carolyn did the same. She married her high school sweetheart, and they both dropped out of college. Jerry went to work for Murray of Ohio Bicycle Company. His first wife's name was Julie. That would be Jeff's mother. And Carolyn went to work to help support her new family after marrying a fellow named Gary. But they both dropped out of school. And that is when Jerry starts thinking that the wrestling business may be. He's at Murray of Ohio Bicycle Company for a little while, and we'll put that on pause and pick that up in the next episode because we want to see what happens as Jerry works at this corporate job, which he eventually doesn't like, and he wants to come back to the wrestling business. But one more story.
Things were different back then. I had a hardship license at 14 as well. I had a license since the day I turned 14. But back then, if you worked out on a ranch or something or had to work, they just gave you a license. It wasn't a big deal.
Right. Yeah, we call them farmer's license, and where I grew up.
That's exactly the same exact thing.
You had like 5 miles you could get out of, it's like a radius of 5 miles you could get out of it with our restricted license.
Well, and farmers
had ours weren't even restricted. Of course, we had the farms were so big that so far.
Well, you live out in the middle of nowhere.
That's right. 5 miles wouldn't get you to the end of the ranch.
Well, and a lot of farm families were big families. I mean, they were like 6 kids, 7 kids, 8 kids, or whatever, and so those were basically your labor.
Well, you had to drive.
So you had to drive. You learned to drive. I learned to drive a tractor, but I was 9 or 10.
I look at these kids now. They're 17 years old. They're still only driving with their parents.
Right. Yep. One more story about Christine. On Christmas Day, 1961, the wrestling office was located in the Maxwell House Hotel, and it caught on fire. And they're in their new house on Princeton Avenue on Christmas Day. They turn on the television, and there's the Maxwell House Hotel on fire. And Christine is like, oh, my God, And so she grabs Jerry. She tells Carolyn, watch the house. We'll be back. They rush downtown Nashville. She sets Jerry on the curb 3 blocks away and says, you stay right here. Do not move. Christine Jarrett runs into the burning Maxwell House Hotel and grabs the financial journals for the Goulas Welch Wrestling Company, comes out, sets them down on the curb, runs back in, gets another handful of financial ledgers, runs back out of the hotel. There's policemen, fire sirens. They're trying to control the crowd. She just busts right past them and goes back in the 3rd time into the burning hotel and comes back out with about $20,000 that they kept in the wrestling office. So she saved all the financial journals and $20,000 from the wrestling office, and the Maxwell House Hotel burned down.
I hope that's when they gave her that town to promote.
Well, she had the town about 5 years before the hotel burned, but I think she's going to get some more towns. Yeah. The businesses that were operating there were restaurants there was travel agency there was a couple of other businesses located in the hotel, and they were all producing about $150,000 a year in rental income for the hotel. That'd be about $1.6 million today. The damage to the hotel was well over $1 million, which would be $15.8 million today. And they investigated that for 2 years, and they thought they found the guy that was the arsonist that set the fire. There was a huge trial. I don't think anybody ever got convicted over it. I think it just kind of went away, and I don't think I think they ended up doing something else there, and the Maxwell House was gone forever.
So Christine, see there. So let's go to the Jack and Lester Welch. Jack, it seems to be the forgotten brother in this whole family here. What was the reason behind that?
So I talked to Ron Fuller about that a little bit. We've talked a couple of times this week. He loves the show, and hey, Ron, thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. And he was giving me some insight. He said Jack wasn't really that good in the ring, and he wasn't as good a wrestler as Lester and Roy and Herb, and he was more entrepreneurial, and he had a little bit more of Roy's kind of business about him, and so he was more interested in running towns. So he never won a title, never had a championship, never really had too many significant programs. He had a few, but really was more interested in the
It seemed like he
promotional.
was always in those 4-man or
Yeah,
6-man or 8-man tags and kind of
he was.
hide his abilities in there.
Yeah, he was always an asset to a Welch feud rather than having, like, he didn't have the singles programs that Herb had or the singles programs that Lester had. He was always involved in the secondary. Maybe there were 2 or 3 guys the Welches were feuding with, and he had a match with the third guy, right, or
Was he
something like
about the
that.
same size as Roy?
Yeah, yeah,
Jack?
yeah. They were all pretty close in state. Herb was kind of the biggest one, but they were all pretty hefty, strong fellas. Um, so let's
And
talk about
Lester. Before we get let's get Lester.
yeah, Lester. You know, he was in World War II, and he was a decorated veteran. He had spent time in the
Was
U.S.
he a
Navy.
pilot? Was he a pilot
Yep,
in the war?
that's where he got interested in flying, and he was a skilled pilot, and he was
He
a
was a very good
lover
pilot.
of quarter horses. He loved quarter horses. As a matter of fact, that's the first time I ever heard of Lester Welch was through my father, who was also a lifetime. They were both lifetime members of the American Quarter Horse Association, and Dad would talk about the quality kind of horses that Lester Welch would have, and that would bring them to Nashville to cutting horse shows. Those are the horses that you train to cut cows, you know, out of a herd, and they sort of dance back and forth on their front feet, keeping a cow from going a certain direction. And Lester was big into that. He also got an airplane in the mid 50s. And
He's
we're
the
going
one
to,
that kind of spawned all the pilots. I mean, Eddie became a pilot. Don Carter, all these guys, all these promoters that were around the Welches, they seemed to all get their pilot's license after Lester.
yeah, and we're going to get into all the television shows they had in
Wow,
just a little
yeah.
bit. And they figured out, man, the way we're going to get our top guys around to all these towns and television shows is we need to fly them. And so oftentimes the top 4 to 6 guys would be in a plane with Lester, and they'd be making the television show in Nashville. Then they'd be on the television show in Birmingham, and then they'd be on the television show in Chattanooga or whatever. And so he was flying them around to different shows and to different television shows. And I also think that that might be a reason why Roy didn't work a lot of those towns, because I go back to that story about him just not liking to fly. So he did a lot of driving distance loops rather than flying. But
Now this flying, because one of the reasons too, I think you mentioned too, that there were a lot of accidents in that territory.
a lot of car accidents.
A lot of car accidents.
Yeah, a lot of car accidents. I mean, I've explained that to my mom several times, who has never flown before and thinks that she never will. She just terrified about it. I'm like, look, Mom, you drive down the road, you're only like inches from death. Like the other person on the other side in the lane that's coming toward you, they're only inches away from you. And there are thousands more car accidents every day than plane accidents. You know, you're not going to hit anything up there, you know,
Hopefully.
right, right. And they don't fall out of the sky. At least they sort of glide down if you're going down.
The only
But
thing Lester had real problems with was getting rolled in the Bahamas, right?
Yeah, Lester was the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
He had some singles runs in the territory, but really he was really noted as being Herb's tag team partner. He also the other family members like the Fields. He held the world tag team title with Lee Fields in '58. He held the world tag team title with Herb in 1960, and they had a big feud with Toru Yamato and Mr. Moto. He didn't have a singles heavyweight championship title until he went to Florida. So he was part of the Welch gang, right? He was one of the catalysts inside the Welch brothers. So he worked as tag team partners and in those programs more than he worked in a single. And he had a few other tag team partners too, but all the Welches were, except Herb. You know, Herb had a lot of major singles titles. Most of everybody else was just all tag guys.
Is this during the time where they're breaking in a lot of local guys, Tony, and they're creating their own talent network?
Yeah, probably in our next episode in the '60s, we'll get into Herb's training school. You know, Herb opens up a school in Tennessee and trains a lot of guys you've heard of, and so we definitely will get into that. Let's talk about television. So, if we go back, and we covered a lot of this in the Jim Barnett series, but professional wrestling in the 1950s was on the Dumont Network, and it was hotter than pancakes, man. I mean, people loved it from 1949 to 1955. I mean, it got to where there were 18 wrestling shows on television in a single week, and it burned the audience out, right? And so in 1955, they decided to stop doing the network broadcast. Say that again right quick.
How many television shows were there?
18.
Wow.
18. Now, in what? Like I know Dumont was pretty much the only national, right?
Of course, all the networks. I mean, CBS started carrying wrestling, NBC started carrying wrestling, ABC started carrying wrestling.
So the idea was local wrestling, not nationwide, though, right?
Well,
nationwide.
There were 18 network television shows. There was Hollywood wrestling. There was Texas wrestling. There was wrestling from Pittsburgh. There were all kinds of them. I made a list. I don't have it in front of me, but there were that many. And like right now, there's wrestling on every night of the week right now. You got Monday night, you got Tuesday night, you got Wednesday night, you got Thursday night, you got Friday night, and then you got Saturday night's main event every now and then. I mean, it's every night of the week, and that's the way it was in 1954 and 1955, and it burned out the audience, right? In 1953, Fred Kohler was making all kinds of money. Over $50,000 a year was coming to Fred Kohler just on having his wrestling out there and booking talent out to other people and running shows all across the country. I mean, it was hot. And in 1955, in March, Dumont canceled their live broadcasts of wrestling that they'd always done from wrestling.
Was this like an instant thing, or was it building toward that, or did people know that it was going to be canceled out?
I think it was just like everything else. It was a bubble that burst that probably people were aware of, but they weren't really it was the boiling frog. You know, it was just slowly but surely cooking the frog, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Hey, wait a minute, we killed the frog. You know, we've overdone this." So they canceled their live telecasts from the Marigold in March of '55 because it was costing more to produce, get the heavy equipment over there, and all that. Which, if you'll remember, that's when Jim Barnett came up with the idea of studio wrestling.
Yeah,
studio wrestling, because the television production truck broke down. And they thought, hey, we'll just do this show at the studio. Well, I talked about this in the Jim Barnett episode, but that just ran through the National Wrestling Alliance because Jim Barnett had earned the nickname the Wizard of Professional Wrestling because he was coming up with all these innovative ideas, and studio wrestling was one of them. Well, all the promoters started thinking, we can do this. We can have studio wrestling in our town if we can get a television station to work with us, right? And so Dumont actually had a studio wrestling show in 1956. It was the last wrestling that was ever on the Dumont Network. They produced it at Channel 5, WABD TV, just outside, well, actually, it was in Manhattan on 205 East 67th Street. And it was the first studio format wrestling show in New York City. They took their cue from Jim Martinet's wrestling in Cincinnati. And Eastern Sports Enterprises was the booker. Eastern Sports Enterprises was owned by Rudy Dusick. And he was booking the talent there in that studio wrestling show.
Of the big Dusick wrestling family, right?
Of the Nebraska Dusicks.
Right.
Yeah. Rudy owned the booking office there just outside New York. And Dumont's hemorrhaging money. They start canceling wrestling. They start cutting back. And they finally went out of business August 6, 1956, which would be the end of any kind of national network wrestling that was on television until Saturday Night's Main Event in 1985. But that studio show that they did there for a little while in 1955 had it had a lot of matches on it that were remarkable. One of the matches that was on that studio show from the Telecaster studio in Manhattan was Lou Thez defending the NWA World title against Pat O'Connor, and they win a 60-minute draw on television. And that was to start getting Pat over, right? They didn't. The NWA champion didn't draw well in New York, so they were trying to get over the title. They were trying to get Lou over better. They were trying to get Pat over as a future champion. So they took up an entire 1-hour television show with one match, and I would give anything to have a copy of that, but of course we don't.
And this is under Vince McMahon Sr.'s leadership then.
This is under
Right.
Rudy Dusick. Yeah.
Rudy Dusick,
Yeah. So there were before Vince consolidated the promoters to go into New York from his Washington office, there were 5 or 6 promoters in New York City. And they all had they were like the mafia families, they had a little section of New York. Somebody had New Jersey. Somebody had the Sunnyside Arena. Some people had the other, arenas. So there were a whole bunch of them. Vince kind of came in, and that's when he made a deal with the 3 or 4 Toots Mondt and who was the other guy that promoted in New York?
Gold Dust Trio type guys.
Nah, I can't think of his name right now. Shoot, it's right there on the edge of my tongue.
One and a half was it?
No, Al was in Ohio.
That was your guy, Jerry, that he's talking about.
The guy that was
with the long fingernail.
Jack Pfeffer.
Pfeffer.
Yeah, Pfeffer was a promoter there. But I still if I don't think about it, it'll come to me.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the other match that was really important to the story that we're telling today was the Stevens brothers. The Stevens brothers were Ray and Don Stevens. And they were a brother tag team, right? And they went out there and they were going to have a match. And there were 2 guys that they had asked to put them over. And Buddy Rogers was kind of running the show backstage. Buddy tells these 2 guys, I want you to go out there and I want you to fly around for Ray and Don Stevens. And they refused to do it. So Buddy and Billy Darnell go out there and they have a 2 out of 3 falls match. And they fly around for Ray and Don Stevens, and it gets Ray Stevens over like crazy, gets Don Stevens over. Don Stevens is actually Don Colt, who in our story in just a little bit is going to become Don Fargo.
Right.
And so he gets the Stevens brothers over. They eventually win the match by disqualification, but it's the start of Ray Stevens' rise in wrestling. And Roy Shire would use that and would use Ray Stevens to eventually take over the San Francisco market in 1960. And I don't know if Roy saw that match on television, but if he did, that was one of the reasons why he brought Ray out to San Francisco. So the thing is after this wrestling disappears from network television, just so happens that's about the time Roy and Nick start their first live studio wrestling show in the summer of 1955. Roy's instincts of national versus regional and local were just phenomenal. It was like when he saw that he didn't want to build his territory around the heavyweights, he wanted to build it around the junior heavyweights. The heavyweights were in all the papers and touring all the big towns. Roy had the junior heavyweights that was just kind of in his territory, kind of like Amarillo, where they were over and they were the local stars in his territory. So he saw that, yeah, people are burned out on network television wrestling, but we're going to give them our local guys that they love on television. So they started out with their first show on WSIX Channel 8 in Nashville. And they had been running Hollywood wrestling from Los Angeles. But when the Dumont went off, that program went away. And that was Roy and Nick's opportunity to jump in there with their own studio show. So this made Nashville one of the early hubs for local televised wrestling in the South. And it helped build a massive fan base. Nashville had 3 television stations at the time: WSM Television, Channel 4. WSM Channel 4 was an NBC affiliate, and it was closely associated with the Grand Ole Opry. And it had a lot of local shows that were country music people because of their association with the Opry, because WSM Radio was the flagship station for the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. WSM call letters were taken from the insurance company that started the Grand Ole Opry, and the call letters stood for "We Save Millions." from calamity, right? It's not sort of like the call letters for WLS in Chicago. They were owned by the Sears Corporation, and WLS stood for World's Largest Store. Channel 5 was WLAC Television, and they were a CBS affiliate. And the channel for Welch and Goulas was WSIX, and they were CBS. And they had been a Dumont Network affiliate. So people were already used to watching this station for wrestling. It was brilliant. So they gave them the local stars that they had been reading about in the newspaper for 25 years. And some of these people had never been to the Hippodrome. They had never been to a live arena. They had never seen wrestling live. They just read about it in the newspaper. Now, all of a sudden, it's coming into their living room. So whereas Roy and Nick were drawing somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 people to the Hippodrome, now it's 350,000 people watching wrestling for the first time. Local Southern kind of wrestling, not what they had been seeing on the Dumont. We go back to the difference. If we were to talk about wrestling in the northern part of the United States, watch the wrestling that you see on YouTube from the Dumont. That is what the northern style looks like, right, Jerry?
Right, exactly.
But then they were tuning in on WSIX for the first time, and there's this crazy, fast-paced, high spots, heels doing dastardly things, baby faces getting the crap kicked out of them right in their living room. I mean, it's difficult for us to even relate to that, isn't it?
And like you said, the baby faces of that era, they sold a lot.
Oh my God, they were and they were not.
They could make that far Southern comeback.
And they were working stiff too. I mean, the photos.
Roy Welch,
yeah, the photos you see of their faces are just pummeled, right? And so there was the ring announcer for the show was a local guy on WSIX who was a local personality. This is something that would also be something that the Welches and Goulases would do, is they would get these local stars to host the wrestling show. And they would even take it even further in the 60s. But so they get Smiling Jack Simpson. Smiling Jack Simpson was a local television guy who had been around on WSIX since the 40s. He goes back to before television, back in radio. And so he was the ring announcer. He was also called Gentleman Jack Simpson. And he always showed up at the Hippodrome. He was the ring announcer at the Hippodrome every Tuesday night for the big wrestling card, and he was the ring announcer for the television show for the wrestling matches. He was a big guy who was involved in all the local sports around Nashville. He was very involved in amateur boxing. He was a member of uh, the Nashville Amateur Boxing Association. He'd been a World War II veteran. He was a member of all the local people who sponsored wrestling, like American Legion, the VFW. He was an active member of his Presbyterian church. He was just a big time community guy around Nashville. And unfortunately, he ended up being the announcer for about 13 years. He passed away in 1968. He was walking his dog, and they were going down to the pet store, and his dog broke its leash and was running crazy into the pet store, and he was trying to get his dog, and he ended up having a heart attack and passing away in the middle of the pet store. But he had been in radio for years. He'd worked in Chicago, Shreveport, Jackson, Mississippi, and he was just one of those people that the people knew who he was because they had seen him on television for 12 or 13 years before the wrestling show ever came on. The guy who handled the play-by-play, who sat behind the desk on the first wrestling show in Nashville, was a guy named Gil Green. Gil Green was the regular weatherman and sportsman on WSIX. So he was the guy that was on television every night giving sports and weather. People knew him. He was a very attractive, handsome guy. I'll send you guys some pictures of him. He was very popular, but crazily and terribly unstable. He had coverage of Pat Boone's Journey to the Center of the Earth when that movie came out in 1959. They sent WSIX radio and television down there to cover the movie premiere. In the age now we live in where there's streaming and there's Netflix and there's HBO, it's hard to relate to what it was like for us growing up when a new movie came out at the movie theater. But it was a big, big deal. And so they covered this premiere of this movie. Gil Green was the guy they sent down to cover it on television. About 1964, they renamed the show from Live. The original name of the show was Live Wrestling. That was just the name of it. They changed the name to All Star Wrestling around 1964, and they went from a live format to a taped format. They would tape the show in the afternoon, and then it would run about from 5 to 6:30. It was about an hour and a half long. When the show was originally on, it ran from 8:30 to midnight. I mean, it was like,
that's a long show.
Yeah, 2.5 hours long.
That had to be one of the longest independent shows out there that going.
Yeah, and first one of the first too.
And one of the first, and then what you're also saying is that their TV shows were the prototype of what's going on around the country, where they're hiring a local weather guy, I mean, I go back to early territories that I worked in. They all had the local newscaster or the local sports guy or weather guy doing something in the show there. So that was they're into the network.
So one thing I kind of want to follow up on that I've wondered about is I wonder which one was first. I wonder because Nashville for as long as you can remember, Nashville is going to be known as a syndicated television show for country music. I mean, all these shows started coming out in syndication. I've often wondered if the wrestling show came first or if they saw what the Grand Ole Opry and these television producers were doing, because you had the Stars of the Grand Ole Opry show, which came out in 1955, the same year that Studio Live Wrestling came out. You had the Purina Opry show. You had the Porter Wagoner show, which was the show I watched when I was a kid. That was a syndicated show that ran for 31 years. You had the Wilburn Brothers. You had the Ernest Tubb Show.
Ernest Tubb Record Shop.
Yeah. You had the Bill Anderson Show. You had the Music City USA. You had, one of the most famous shows was Hee Haw, that came out in Nashville in 1969. But all of these television shows being done in Nashville and syndicated around the South and the Midwest for sure. I just wonder if chicken or egg, which one was it? But it was an exciting time. It was a pioneering time for television, for sure, and for live entertainment being on television.
And then those country stars, they really used the wrestling show there a lot because they appeared on the wrestling show frequently, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and
As we heard, Webb Pierce fell in love with Cora Combs.
yeah,
On the show.
and we're probably going to talk about it in our next show. But Webb Pierce actually did a record release with Jackie Fargo. So I found that. I'm gonna send that to you guys.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah. The sad story about Gil Green is that he ends up committing suicide. On June 6, 1966, he drank Weed Killer. And it was
drank what? Weed Killer.
Weed Killer. Yeah, it was a weed killer called Triox.
What a horrible way to die.
Well,
Ooh,
it gets worse. His wife came home. He only been married about a year, and his wife came home and found him, and he told her, he said, "I've drank the weed killer and I'm passing away now." And they rushed him to a Baptist hospital. They tried to pump his stomach, but he died there in intensive care. Later on, I found in newspaper reports that his wife was interviewed, and she said, well, and she doesn't say specifically what job, but she said he was very dissatisfied with his job. Now, I said earlier he was unstable. This guy quit and came back to the television station like 6 times. Like and he was popular in Nashville. He hosted all the beauty pageants. He hosted all the live country shows. He hosted the fundraisers. He was the MC guy that every community has, that you see him on television, and then he's at the charity event and he's the host of the show, right? That was Gil Green. I mean, he was very handsome. He was only 37 years old when he passed away, and had a wonderful family. He come to WSIX in 1949, and he was a staff announcer there. Back in those days, you had what was called the head announcer, and that was the main guy, and then everybody else was staff announcers. And so Jack Simpson was more the head announcer, and Gil Green was a staff announcer. But Gulas Welch had both of them on their television show on the station that they were on every single day, which was pretty damn smart. So here's something that I found fascinating. So looking through all these newspaper archives and everything, when wrestling hits television in Nashville in 1955, and these people see this Southern wrestling with all this heat radiating from their television, from all these things that are going on right in front of them that maybe they had never been to the arena show, but now they see it on their television every Saturday night for a couple of hours. The letters that get published in the newspaper about the wrestling show like exponentially increase. So here's a letter. It says, it was encouraging to see a member of the State Athletic Commission condemn publicly the dirty tactics of 2 of the wrestlers on television the other night. He wrote a letter, he's talking about the athletic commissioner. He wrote a letter to uphold the referee and fine those wrestlers. It does not matter to an old codger like me, but the influence of example in forming the habits of our young children who naturally take an interest in sports is important. We ourselves should love truth and honesty more than we love our short lives in this world. If the athletic commission, the referee, and the sentiment of the people would not give their soul in exchange to gain the whole world, cannot keep unprincipled wrestlers out of the ring. Let's ask our next legislator to make public wrestling unlawful. I'd like to say amen to the good woman who spoke out at the wrestling match a few Saturday nights ago. This must have been a fan that they interviewed on television about an angle that they ran, right?
Probably Christine Jarrett's mother.
It says, I'd like to say amen to the good woman who spoke out at the wrestling match a few Saturday nights ago so positively and wisely against these indecent tactics that they had on the show the other night. I feel like she voiced the sentiments of thousands of people. Let's have more honesty in all our sports. I mean, they're seeing these heels do all this stuff on television, and it's making them mad. Mad enough to sit down and write a letter. Here's another one. It says, these dirty tricks that are pulled in wrestling in Nashville at the wrestling matches on Saturday night. See, I know this is the television show because they say Saturday night. Well, the wrestling house show's on Tuesday night. So these are people watching on TV. He says, these dirty tricks pulled in wrestling at the wrestling matches every Saturday night need some new rules and enforcement. These tag team matches are carried on shamefully. Here's what we need to do. Number one, when two men are in the ring wrestling, if either one of their partners gets in the ring, they need to be fined or disqualified. So the heels are doing that, right? They're switching out behind the referee's back. They're making, false tags. They're slipping in, when the referee's distracted. They're doing all these things, and these people have never seen this before. She goes, never allow a wrestler to back his opponent in the corner and let his partner work him over. So the heel has backed him up in the babyface in the corner. The referee's trying to push him back off, and while the referee's pushing him off, the other heel outside the ring is just beating the heck out of him. She's like,
sounds like they're watching a bunch of APA matches.
that should be done away. That should never be allowed. Number three, and we know that they're getting down with it on the wrestling program, because number three is, after the bell has rung, no more punches. So, they're ringing that bell, and those guys are fighting all over and brawling
getting heat.
I often wonder if the referee doesn't have bad vision to fail to see some of this dirty tricks they're using. Why can't wrestling be clean-handed and the winner win with skill? If this sport was conducted in a clean manner, it would be delightful entertainment for everybody.
Amen.
And then finally, there's one letter from this lady. She says, I grew up without things like other girls had, and not long ago, my husband gave me a television set, and now my father thinks it belongs to him and will not let me watch the stations or programs I like. He has all of his friends over to watch the wrestling matches on television, which I hate. And she got her father living with them, and he's commandeered the television and asked all of his buddies to come over so they could watch wrestling on TV.
Love it.
Oh man, we can't even understand what this was like. I mean, we've just become desensitized to it. Like, it's just something that happens. But
this is so early in television days too. I mean, to see something and early TV, they had all these pure family shows that were clean
and television only been around 5 or 6 years, and they had just watched. If they had watched wrestling, they had watched Dumont, which, if you watch Dumont, there's not a lot of heat. There's a few things that go on, but it's not like what Roy and Nick are doing. And these people are like, oh, I've never seen wrestling. I think I'll check it out. And it's like, oh my God, what is this? This is craziness. So pretty innovative, pretty awesome. They are. And something else is going to happen here in Nashville that is going to amplify this for sure. Knoxville got television, and Rex Rainey was the host there in 56, maybe early 58. Paducah got a live studio show on Channel 6 WPSD in 1957. And in a lot of towns, Roy had these town promoters that had been running these Tennessee territory towns for years. And he's telling them, hey, we're doing this in Nashville. We're on WSIX. You got to get a show in your town. And so they weren't doing syndicated. They were just setting up live studio shows in all of these towns. And they were just copying what they had done in Nashville. And they already had the talent because they had such territory to cover. They had enough guys to send around, and they just, whatever programs they were running in those towns, those were the guys they put on television. And they would just tell people, like, if you can get a syndicated show, so those, after the Dumont Network went away, you still had Hollywood wrestling, you still had Texas wrestling, you still had these shows that were being sent out in syndication that these local stations were running for programming. And Roy and Nick would say, if you can get them kicked off, and if it takes a live studio show to do it, you just tell them we'll do a live studio show right there, and they won't be getting wrestling from some other place. They'll be getting the wrestling from right here where people love. Which
that answers a question that I have there. So rather than bicycling the tape around to get the other people off the air, they just did offer to do live shows.
Yeah, yeah. Which is, they had the resources to do it. It's pretty ingenious.
Yeah, but the mileage once again on the boys, the wear and tear on the boys had to be.
I mean, that
because you were going in your notes that each town had their own little separate TV. Just making those TVs would keep you busier than hell.
Oh, that booking sheet that Justin sent me for Jesse James. Yeah. I mean, that's how I found out that they had some of these shows, is because it was in his bookings that he had to be in Paducah. He had to be in Bowling Green. He had to be in Jackson. He had to be in Bristol. And some of those shows were taped on Monday, and they would have a Monday studio television show. They'd have a Tuesday night house show, and then that tape that they taped on Monday would run on Saturday, or in some towns, they would have to be there live on Saturday to do the show. So, I mean, they just told the local television station manager, I'm going to give you your own local wrestling show that's going to apply to your community, which was pretty smart.
Yeah, it is.
How many different studio shows were they running?
Gosh, it was over 10.
Wow. So that's a weekly 10 studio shows you're running.
Yeah, I know, like by the time it got to the late 60s and into the 70s, it's a pretty famous little story about how you would do the Memphis show, and the Memphis show would be from 10 till noon, let's say. It might have been 10:30 to, I don't know, but it was in the morning. So you'd do the Memphis show in the morning from 10 to noon. You would drive then to, I think, Chattanooga, and you would do the Chattanooga show at 4, and then the Birmingham show was at 8. So you'd make that all in one day. You'd do the Memphis show in the morning, you'd do the Chattanooga show in the afternoon, you'd do the Birmingham show at night, all on Saturday.
It's sort of like at Georgia, the WTSG, at 7 o'clock in the morning, we'd report for TV in Atlanta, do the early morning TV show to be aired that night, get in your car and drive 100 some odd miles to Columbus to Fred Ward's TV show that afternoon. Then go to Carrollton or Griffin that night, be 50 miles from home.
And do a house show. Yeah.
And Jerry, how were you guys getting paid for TV?
If you went over, nothing. If you lost, you got $25.
Right. So that's what I was thinking. So you get.
So that's a great question, because all these guys doing TV, where they getting paid TV, seems like it really counted their household money off.
Yeah, it was
the method of getting paid on TV back in those days. My days when I started, if you went over, you didn't get nothing. That was your pay to go over, and if you lost, you got your $25
yeah, I don't think Roy and Nick were doing that. I just think they were saying, hey, you're getting paid based on your tickets, and this is a way for you to sell.
But you're going to studio wrestling, you're going to draw, 50 people max.
Yeah.
And also it's taking away a big spot show night on Saturday. You might work that night somewhere, but if you're doing TV that day, you're missing out on a pretty good payday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you might come back then Monday night in Birmingham, and then you'd be Thursday night in Chattanooga, and you'd be Monday night in Memphis, or whatever, however the schedule fell.
You have how long this model lasted? I mean,
well, it lasted up until Jerry and Nick split. I mean, so it lasted up till 77. I mean, for a little while, and we can get into this in future shows, but in a little while, Louisville had a live show, and so there were some other shows being added in to it, but Nashville and Memphis were kind of two different territories. Nashville had Nashville, Bowling Green, Chattanooga, and that end, and then Memphis had Memphis, Louisville, Evansville, and Tupelo, Mississippi, and they had that in. But some of those had live studio shows to go to, or they started syndicating the tape around.
Now, Tony, were Roy and these guys, were they making any money off these TVs?
No, not really. It was just advertising.
Right.
It was just
spending a lot of time and effort, a lot of travel for the advertisement for the house shows that they're going to run the rest of the 6 days of the week.
Right. So there was another thing that happened about a year and a half after they got on television in Nashville. The arrival of the Fabulous Fargos. They were absolutely perfect for wrestling on television because they were flashy, they were loud, they were obnoxious, and they put them over all the time. And I kind of think Jackie and Don Fargo sort of were the first guys to really start hitting guys with chairs. And people started seeing that on television. And that made them even more evil and dastardly. And they did, and in those days, Jackie and Don didn't look that much different.
No,
They
didn't.
looked closely like brothers. I mean, Don looked a lot rougher in his later years, but in those early years, where he was kind of a pretty boy heel, like he had
Don
been.
looked a lot like Eddie Graham to me.
Yeah. When he was a pretty boy heel with Ray Stevens, they were the Stevens brothers. They were, you know, and that would be replicated with, you know, Eddie Graham was kind of that way. He was the good looking heel guy, right? But Jackie and Don were that guy. They got hooked up with Jack Pfeffer. Jackie said one time, he said, "You know how much money I made Jack Pfeffer over the years?" And they're like, "No." He goes, "A lot." And he goes, "You know how much I paid Jack Pfeffer to manage me?" And they're like, "How much?" He goes, "Not a dime."
I love this story. Tell, what was Jack Pfeffer's role with these guys? I mean, he volunteered to be their manager, right? He comes to them.
Yeah. He found them in New York after Jackie and Don had teamed up, which they were actually Wild Man Jackie Fargo and Wild Man Don Stevens. And they were a tag team in New York, and they had the big match with Argentina Rocket and Miguel Perez that drew all the money. And Pfeffer saw that, and he saw them, and he showed up one day, and he said, "Hey, I'll be your manager, and it's not going to cost you a thing." And they said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you're not going to pay me. The promoters are going to pay me. And I'm going to take a percentage of, you know, what you make at the house shows, but you're never going to see that money. That's going to come directly to me, and I'm going to demand, you know, that they pay you a certain amount, and I'm going to make sure that you make money." And Jackie always said that was the smartest thing he ever did. Was
he becomes a real manager, not a
no, he managed their travel, he managed their hotel rooms, he managed their bookings, he managed everything. And the promoters
bought them the robes, right? He bought them the robes.
Yeah, he had Jackie said he had a huge trunk of all this flashy clothes, and they had to lug that trunk around with them to all the house shows that had all their costumes. And the innovative thing about the Fargos was, and this was especially innovative on television,
this is so cool too.
if they had a 2 out of 3 fall match, every fall they changed their outfit.
Yeah. In between each fall, they go back and change their outfit.
Yeah, they'd change their trunks, they'd change their jackets, they'd change everything. And when they came out for fall number 2, it'd be a completely different outfit, completely different trunks, completely everything. They did the strut, you know, the Fargo strut that the Fabulous ones would later do. And television, they were just the perfect combination to blow up everybody's TV, man. So they actually worked in Memphis a couple of weeks before Nick and Roy bought Memphis in 1957, and they worked with Rogers and Darnell, the guys that had put Don over on Dumont Television so strongly. Even though Darnell and Rogers won the match, they won it by DQ.
Billy Darnell and Buddy Rogers.
Yeah, and you tell they were Pfeffer guys also, so you can tell, you know, that Jack's booking them together, right? And he books them in Memphis. They don't draw hardly much of anything, you know. And when Nick and Roy, we'll get into this in just a little bit. When Nick and Roy buy Memphis, they can't get it going. So where the Fabulous Fargos really pop is on WSIX television in Nashville on the live wrestling show. So let's go through this run of the Fargo brothers. June 4th, 1957, it is the first of 18 straight sellouts at the Hippodrome. So June 4th, 1957, the first appearance of the Fargo brothers. Standing room only. Newspapers claim they beat the Corsican brothers, Corsica Joe and Corsica Gene, for the tag team titles in June. I think that was a fictitious title change. I can't find it anywhere. I think they just gave the belts to the Fargos and made up that story for television. But it's the Fargos versus...
That's a Rio de Janeiro story.
Yeah, that's their Rio de Janeiro. The Fargos versus Buddy Rogers and Tex Riley. And Tex Riley is a huge babyface in the Tennessee territory. Jackie used a concealed object to cut Buddy Rogers' head on television, and also in the.
Is this the first case of blood, you think, on television?
I don't know, because Roy and them always took hard way beatings.
Right.
But Jackie cut Rogers on television, and that, was really, really
was
something.
the foreign object, it says.
Yeah, concealed object. And they arrested the Fargos and took them to jail. And
really?
Yep. And Nick had to pay their bail to get them out. They had actually debuted in Knoxville in May, and they beat Herb and Lester up there 2 falls straight. So they are putting them over. This is going to be the team that they're going to ride, the heel team they're going to ride. So June 11th, 1957, standing room only, Jackie Fargo and Don Fargo beat Buddy Rogers and Tex Riley 2 falls to 1 to keep the tag team titles. In the third fall, Don hits Riley with a drop kick that sends him and referee Sam Miniker flying through the ropes and out of the ring, down to the floor. Jackie comes around the ring illegally and hit Riley with an atomic drop. That was Jackie's Fargo finish for years. He called it the turd tamper. The second referee, thinking it was Don, counted Riley down, and the Fargos won, and the studio wrestling crowd went crazy. And then
are there any records of riots at TV studios?
Yeah, this is one of them where the studio wrestling crowd is going nuts. So a couple days after that, Nick and Roy announced they have bought the city of Memphis for the territory. June 18th, 1957, standing room only, Jackie and Don Fargo beat Tex Riley and Herb Welch 2 falls to 1. And one of the Fargos, one of the stipulations to the match is one of the Fargos has to wear a jacket in the ring so the referee can tear them apart. That way they can't sneak around and do dastardly things and the referee doesn't know who is who. So I think actually the stipulation was they had to wear a T-shirt or jacket, but they actually did wear a jacket that night to distinguish one Fargo from the other. June 25th, 1957, standing room only, Jackie and Don Fargo beat Corsica Joe and Corsica Gene to keep the world tag titles. No disqualification, no time limit. One of the Fargos must wear a T-shirt or jacket during the match. Standing room crowd at the Hippodrome, and extra seats were installed. So they had about 3,000 people they turned away at the door. July 2nd, 1957, standing room only, Jackie and Don Fargo, no contest ending, Herb Welch and Tex Riley, with each team winning 1 fall. World Tag Team title held up by the Tennessee Athletic Commission, another 3,000 turned away at the door. July 9th, 1957, Corsica Joe and Corsica Gene beat the Fabulous Fargos in a non-title match 2 falls to 1. July 16th, 1957, standing room only, Fabulous Fargos beat Tex Riley and Herb Welch 2 falls to 1 fall to get the World Tag Team titles back. July 22nd, 1957, standing room only, Corsica Joe and Corsica Gene beat the Fabulous Fargos 2 falls to 1 in a no DQ, no time limit, 2 referees to win the World Tag Team titles another time with another standing room only crowd. August 5th, 1957, Fabulous Fargos beat the Corsicans in Birmingham to recapture the World Tag Team titles. Then on the TV show in Nashville, August 11th, 1957, Fabulous Fargos beat Herb Welch and Lester Welch. When Lester had Don Fargo pinned, Jackie hit Lester over the head with Sonny Roughhouse Fargo's cane. The brawl after the match had ended and the bell had rung lasted a full 10 minutes on television, and they hit each other with chairs all over the studio.
Wow.
People are seeing this on their TV, man.
Yeah.
That's why they're turning 3,000 away every single Tuesday.
Standing room only every night.
What a terrible finish, though. That could be the worst finish I've ever heard of. Atomic drop.
That was, yeah. Yep. But that was when the atomic drop was new.
Yeah. It was new then. Yeah. Nobody knew it.
August 13th, standing room only. Fabulous Fargos with Sonny Fargo in their corner beat Herb and Lester Welch 2-1 at the Hippodrome. This is building up to a huge match here. August 20th, standing room only. Herb and Lester Welch get their revenge. They beat the Fabulous Fargos 2-1. The main event was supposed to be all three Fargos, Don, Jackie, and Sonny against Herb, Lester, and Roy, but it turned out to be a straight tag. But on August 27th, 1957, standing room only, Texas Tornado 6-man tag match. Jackie, Don, and Sonny Fargo beat Herb, Lester, and Roy Welch 2-1. This is the first time all three Fargos wrestled together in Nashville.
The Welches didn't mind doing jobs, obviously, at all.
No, that was their whole thing. They learned all that from Sarpolis and Dutch Mantel. Yeah. The babyface gets beat right up until the very end, till he finally, it's like every Western movie ever made. The villains beat the hell out of the sheriff and all the good people until the end of the movie, till finally the outlaws get beat. September 3rd, standing room only, Mike Clancy, NWA World Junior Champion, beat Jackie Fargo in a singles match, 2-1, and Herb Welch beat Don Fargo in a 10-round boxing match where Sonny Fargo took off one of Don Fargo's gloves and Don hit Herb with his taped fist. He turned around and slugged Danny Dusick, the referee, and the match got awarded to Herb. September the 10th, 1957, Frank Hewitt and Tor Yamato beat Mike Clancy and Herb Welch in a grudge match on top in a main event that ended the 18-week run of sellouts and standing room only cards in Nashville at the Hippodrome with the Fabulous Fargos. It was a amazing run that took place within the first year and a half of their television. That really
Mike, go ahead.
Go want to say something about Mike Clancy?
Mike Clancy was a big influence on me. He was retiring when I first breaking into business in Oklahoma. Irish Mike Clancy had an Italian pizza. Irish Mike Clancy's Italian pizza place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's a popular pizza places in Tulsa at the time.
Yeah, this was the year, I think in 57, this was the year he beat Ed Francis for the World Junior title. And he made a lot of World Junior title defenses in the Tennessee.
Yeah, he and Hodge had a feud out in Oklahoma.
Between 1957 and 1959, the Fabulous Fargos appeared in Knoxville several times. They mainly worked Nashville, Knoxville, Birmingham, and Mobile. Those were the big towns they made. They didn't work Chattanooga all that much, and of course they didn't work the smaller Tennessee towns, but they worked the big A towns and drew all kinds of money. And Jackie Fargo's going to be a legend in Tennessee for the next 30 years or more.
How did Sonny get involved? Sonny was, which one was from China Grove? That was Sonny Fargo.
Yeah, so Sonny is actually Jackie's brother, real brother.
They're actually brothers. I didn't know that.
And they're both from China Grove. And, of course, Sonny is a referee for Jim Crockett. And was a referee for him and wore those blue coveralls for, all up until the 80s.
What a great referee Sonny Fargo was. He didn't mind heat. He would develop heat in there for you if you weren't getting the proper heat as a hill. He would jump in, and what a great referee he was. I just listened to him and his stories. I love working with Sonny and just being around him.
If you want to see two separate dichotomies of people, watch Sonny referee a match and watch him work as Roughhouse Fargo. Two different. Have you guys ever seen Roughhouse Fargo?
Yes. His gimmick, John, his brothers went to the insane asylum and got him out of the crazy house, right?
Yeah. So they would do like this. What they did in Nashville, they'd have like 6 or 7 weeks of a program. And then they'd say, all right, now's the time. We're going to go to the insane state mental institution and get our brother Sonny. And when he came into the arena, man, he came in there. He was like a little Tasmanian devil. He's spinning around, and he'd end up in a lady's lap in the front row, and just insane.
Was he a babyface?
He was in later years, but
Yeah.
he's a heel here in the first run.
It just seems like going to get him, threatening him it's a babyface thing.
Yeah. Well, in later years
Crazy brother.
when Jackie was working as a single, that was when you knew the feud was that getting Sonny out of the mental institution was equivalent to Lawler pulling the strap down. You knew the things were about to come to a head.
Yeah.
When Sonny
business
got
is picking up, as JR would say.
Yeah. So I mean, just a fantastic run by the Fargos in Nashville for Roy and Nick, and just amazing. I mean, the things that made the legend in Tennessee. Um, there was another wrestler who worked in the territory at the time. A lot of times, the programs in Nashville was mainly, they were building up to a Welch program there, but they also worked a lot and got a lot of mileage out of the Corsica brothers. And so they worked with the Corsica brothers more in Mobile, in the Gulf Coast territory, when Buddy Fuller was down there than Nashville. Of course, they were going to work with the Welches.
Yeah, and John Whoopman Smith and his brother, they did a lot of Smith brothers too, right?
Yeah. Al and John Smith. Yeah. And there was a young wrestler working in the territory that was when they did six mans, the Corsicans had a third guy who worked with them as a heel, and his name was Tony Martin. And Tony Martin would later become Tom Renesto.
Oh, wow. I read that and I did not know that.
Yep. Tom Renesto, who would become one of the famous masked assassins with Jody Hamilton. Was cutting his teeth here in Tennessee, and also cutting his teeth with Jim Crockett Sr. in North Carolina.
Tony, we're right at a couple hours, and we're right to 1960. Is this a good spot to cut off our third segment? And
we'll come back next week. We didn't get to Sputnik, but we'll kick off with that next time.
Sputnik is a great thing to kick off with. That'll give us a great start to the fourth episode.
Yeah, Buddy Fuller is sent to South Alabama to create the Mobile booking office for Roy and create the Gulf Coast territory, which stays in business for the next 23 years. We talked about Jim Barnett was going to buy it in the Jim Barnett series, and that never came through. But Buddy makes the Gulf Coast territory into quite something. And then when Roy buys Memphis and can't quite get it going, he brings Buddy up in 1958 and Thanksgiving night in 58. And 1959 in Memphis is just wild and crazy. And that's Sputnik, Monroe, and Billy Wicks.
Awesome. Buddy Fuller. Billy Wicks is somebody we really want to get into because he's a lot like Roy Welch, but
amazing worker.
Yeah. So Buddy Fuller, Buddy, right from the very beginning seemed like he wasn't a guy that really wanted to be in the ring that much, and he was really the business mind of a lot of it too.
Right. Yeah. So
expansions and stuff like that.
Yeah. So that we talked just a minute about Mario Galento. So a lot of those wrestlers that Buddy developed in the Gulf Coast territory were going to be huge in Memphis, like Billy Wicks and Sputnik Monroe and Galento. And they worked an angle in Gulf Coast where Buddy was the promoter. He wasn't really put over as a wrestler. He was a promoter in the territory, and he was licensed with the state of Alabama as a promoter. Therefore, he could not wrestle legally.
You couldn't do both at the time?
Not in Alabama. No, it was like a lot of places where they were not going to issue you two licenses. So Buddy was the known promoter. And so they worked an angle on television for weeks where Mario Galento goes, "Oh, you're just hiding behind that promoter's license. I can kick your butt in 2 minutes." And this went on for 6-7 weeks where Galento was like, I'll kick your ass if you ever get in the ring with me, but you won't ever get into it because you're hiding behind that promoter's license,
And this is where the eye shot comes in, right?
Yeah, and so Buddy gets a special permission from the Athletic Commission in Alabama to wrestle one match. And that one match draws over 10,000 people in the Ladd Stadium Park to see Buddy Fuller and Mario Galento beat the heck out of each other.
Part 3 coming up.
Yeah. And so he takes all that all of that momentum that he builds up in Gulf Coast and brings that into Memphis. So it will be a good place to start.
Well, there you have it. There is part 3, and we'll be back with this part 4, and we'll get within the Sputnik Monroe. See you soon.